What is chlorine generation? Chlorine generation is the process of producing chlorine gas, typically through electrolysis. This involves using a chlorine generator that uses resources like salt, electricity, and water. The generator has a plastic tank divided into two compartments by a filter-type membrane. When electricity separates chlorine from sodium in the salt solution compartment, chlorine gas is generated. This gas then mixes with fresh water in the smaller chamber to form sodium hydroxide. The chlorine gas is then injected into the circulation plumbing. Some generators produce chlorine directly in the circulation water flow for direct application to the pool or spa water. How do chlorine generators work? Chlorine generators work by using resources like salt, electricity, and water to produce chlorine gas through electrolysis. They have a plastic tank divided into two compartments by a filter-type membrane. The larger compartment, containing a positively charged electrode, anode, is filled with a salt, sodium chloride, and water solution. The smaller compartment with a negatively charged electrode, cathode, contains distilled or municipal water. When electricity separates chlorine from sodium in the salt solution compartment, chlorine gas is generated. This gas rises, mixes with fresh water in the smaller chamber to form sodium hydroxide, which is drained periodically. The chlorine gas is then injected into the circulation plumbing. The electrical current is supplied through a transformer that converts 110 or 220 volt AC into 12 volt DC. Regulating the current controls the volume of chlorine produced. Some generators produce chlorine directly in the circulation water flow for direct application to the pool or spa water. What are salt water generators? SVGs. Salt chlorine generators are devices that convert salt into chlorine, maintaining a chlorinated pool. They work by adding ordinary table salt to the pool water, and through an electrolytic process, they convert the salt into chlorine. These generators are increasingly common and are a cost-effective way to sanitize large pools or spas. They use inexpensive resources like salt, electricity, and water to produce chlorine gas. Users report that the increased salinity gives the water a silky texture and reduces chlorine odors. However, maintaining a good water balance and a clear pool is key to eliminating odors. Salt water generators, SVGs, are essentially miniature chlorine factories. They function similarly to large-scale chlorine plants, but use a set of permanent electrodes, typically made of titanium plated with ruthenium. These electrodes are expected to last 3 to 5 years. How does a saltwater chlorine generated work? A saltwater chlorine generated SVG creates chlorine from salt. When electricity passes through a salt and water solution, brine, it produces hydrogen gas at the negative electrode, sodium hydroxide at the negative electrode, and chlorine gas at the positive electrode. The chemical reaction can be summarized as follows. Salt plus water yields chlorine gas plus sodium hydroxide plus hydrogen gas. This process ideally produces pure hydrogen gas, pure chlorine gas, and pure sodium hydroxide. In more detail, the generator has a plastic tank divided into two compartments by a filter-type membrane. The larger compartment, containing a positively charged electrode, anode, is filled with a salt, sodium chloride, and water solution. The smaller compartment, with a negatively charged electrode, cathode, contains distilled or municipal water. The membrane allows electricity to pass, but restricts the chemicals to one side. Chlorine gas is generated in the salt-sodium solution compartment when electricity separates chlorine from sodium. The gas rises, mixes with fresh water in the smaller chamber to form sodium hydroxide, which is drained periodically. Hydrogen gas formed is vented out. Salt is added periodically to recharge the system. The chlorine gas is then injected into the circulation plumbing. The electrical current is supplied through a transformer that converts 110 or 220 volt AC into 12 volt DC. Regulating the current controls the volume of chlorine produced. Some generators produce chlorine directly in the circulation water flow for direct application to the pool or spa water. How does an inline salt water generator SVG work? An inline salt water generator SVG works as pool water, which is salted, flows through an inline SVG cell, and direct current DC electricity is applied to the cell plates. This triggers an electrolysis reaction producing chlorine gas, caustic soda, and hydrogen gas. These products are not separated but introduced into the pool water flow. The electrolysis occurs in an electrolytic cell installed in the plumbing line in the recirculation system. The cell contains layers of plates charged with DC electricity provided by a separate power supply or controller unit. For the unit to operate efficiently, a salt concentration of 3,000 to 3,500 parts per million ppm is needed. How does an inline system work? An inline system works by producing chlorine directly in the pool from salt added to the pool water. The electrolysis occurs in an electrolytic cell installed in the plumbing line in the recirculation system. The cell contains layers of plates charged with DC electricity provided by a separate power supply or controller unit. For the unit to operate efficiently, a salt concentration of 3,000 to 3,500 parts per million ppm is needed. This equates to adding 250 to 300 pounds of salt per 10,000 gallons of water. As pool water salted flows through an inline cell, direct current DC electricity is applied to the cell plates. This triggers an electrolysis reaction producing chlorine gas, caustic soda, and hydrogen gas. These products are not separated but introduced into the pool water flow. To prevent scale buildup on the plates, many inline systems periodically reverse the electrical charge on the plates. This process removes any accumulated calcium or magnesium but reduces the plate's lifespan. How does an inline SVG prevent scale buildup? To prevent scale buildup on the SVG plates, many SVGs periodically reverse the electrical charge on the plates. This process removes any accumulated calcium or magnesium but reduces the plate's lifespan. Does an inline SVG change the water's pH? In theory, inline SVGs should not alter the water's pH. This is because the neutral salt NaCl is split into sodium and chlorine and reintroduced into the water. However, the hydrogen gas produced in a chlorine generator pool escapes, leaving behind hydroxide that raises the pH. Additionally, the chlorine gas produced by the SVG creates hydrochloric acid and hypochlorous acid. The caustic soda neutralizes the hydrochloric acid, and the escaping hydrogen gas creates turbulence, raising the pH. What is the process of water chemistry in salt chlorine generators? Salt chlorine generators require a salt generation of 379 parts per million compared to ocean water's 38,000 parts per million. You can test the salt concentration using a kit that comes with your generator or purchase one from a pool supply store. The generator's computerized control unit converts household AC current 120 or 200 volts to low voltage DC current. This current is sent into an electrolytic cell mounted in a plumbing fitting, which is added to the pool plumbing after the heater. Chlorine is produced as the salted pool water passes between the electrodes. You can adjust the chlorine production by changing the control settings or the generator's operating hours. Salt can be corrosive and tends to build up on surfaces. Therefore, salt chlorine generators usually self-clean every few hours. Most units have sensors to measure the system's flow rate and shut down the unit if problems are detected. How much chlorine is produced by residential saltwater generators, SVGs? Residential saltwater generator SVGs designed for pools up to 25,000 gallons can produce about 1 pound of pure chlorine per day if run continuously at 100%. If run for 8 hours at 70%, they produce about 5 or 6 ounces of pure chlorine. This production rate applies to both brine and inline systems. The chlorine produced by these systems is identical to the type already used in the pool and can be measured with standard test kits or strips. However, the actual output of the SVG or the amount of chlorine produced is based on running the SVG 24 hours a day. For a residential pool that may only operate the filtration pump for 8 hours or less, it means the SVG may be too small for the pump runtime. Is a saltwater generator SVG preferable to liquid chlorine? The preference between a saltwater generator, SVG, and liquid chlorine depends on several factors. While it's cheaper to produce chlorine in the pool with an SVG than to buy liquid chlorine, a SVG continually increases the pool's pH, requiring acid that lowers total alkalinity. The SVG provides a constant daily chlorine amount, maintaining a steady chlorine level, whereas liquid chlorine creates high levels that decrease over time, resulting in peaks and troughs. Each situation requires individual analysis. Why does pH increase with saltwater generators, SVGs? The pH increases with saltwater generators, SVGs, because the electrolysis of saltwater with an SVG produces chlorine gas and sodium hydroxide. The sodium hydroxide, along with hydrogen gas, increases the pH level. This is because the hydrogen gas, which is not soluble in water, escapes the atmosphere, causing turbulence and raising the pH. How does a saltwater generator SVG affect TDS? An SVG pool adds 3,400 ppm of salt to the normal TDS, which may be 1,000 to 2,500 ppm. This makes the total TDS around 4,000 to 6,000 ppm. Pool water with the TDS concentration conducts electricity well, turning the pool into a low voltage battery. What are the advantages of installing a chlorine generator? Installing a chlorine generator reduces chemical costs and improves water quality by providing continuous chlorination. Saltwater generator SVGs superchlorinate the water, reducing the need for separate superchlorination. They also eliminate the need for hazardous chemical transportation, storage, and handling, as well as related safety training and permits. What are the disadvantages of using a chlorine generator? Like any device, SVGs can break down and require maintenance and repairs. They produce a fixed amount of chlorine, which may not be sufficient to handle a sudden increase in organic load from a large numbers of swimmers. Recovery time can be lengthy, and additional chlorine may need to be added separately for residential pools. What are the costs associated with a chlorine generator? There are 4 main costs associated with a chlorine generator. The cost of the unit itself, which typically ranges from $200 to $1,000. The cost of installation, which can vary depending on the complexity of the plumbing required. The cost of the salt, which at 11 cents a pound amounts to $9 to $22 per year for a residential brine system. The cost of the electricity to run the unit. What are the best practices for using salt chlorine generators? The best practices for using salt chlorine generators include adding salt to the pool by broadcasting it over the pool when the circulation is running and not through the skimmer. Granulated table quality salt should be used. Before starting the generator, the pool should be brushed and the water circulated for 24 hours to completely dissolve the salt. The generator should be started at a 50% production level and the chlorine level checked the next day. The residual should be between 1 and 3 ppm. The generator's production level should be adjusted as needed. Every 2 months, the electrolytic cell should be removed and the scale cleaned off the electrodes. The generator should be turned off when adding acid or soda ash to prevent reactions with the electrodes. Normally, operations can be resumed after the acid or soda ash has been thoroughly distributed throughout the pool water.